Okay. Well, I am tickled pink to introduce Steve McNallen, a man that needs no introduction, literally the godfather of Asatru in the United States. I really want to thank you for joining me in this endeavor. There's a lot of information that it gets twisted. Thanks for joining us. I'm glad you're here, man.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Looking forward to interviewing you next too.
Yeah, we're going to do that on Tuesday, right? Tuesday on
That's a fair.
that's going to yeah, that'll be good too. You know, Asatru's changed so much since you kind of picked up that torch in what 1968. I think is what you told me. You kind of got the first inclination.
I think it might have been. I think it might have been 69. It's hard, I wasn't like keeping records at that time.
Right.
I pretty much count this as my 50th year this summer since I decided to follow Odin as my god.
And that's, I talked with Freya Aswin last week, and she talked about when she first came in, she said she was just overcome with the woad, with that spirit. It kind of picked her up and kept her moving forward in a room full of hairy-legged men talking about things. I remember when I first met you at the Heavener Runestone State Park, and I kind of asked you about the beginning of this, and you told me that, I'm not going to steal your thunder. I mean, kind of share with everybody kind of how this started, because there's something very special that happens in this when all of these people in all these different locations pick up this torch, and here we go. So if you would share that with us, because I think it's a very valuable story that a lot of people need to hear.
It's just as though there was a wind blowing through the branches of the world tree.
Right.
And some were tuned into it. I was tuned into it very early, as were people like John Yowell in England with wasn't even the Odinic Rite yet. It was the Committee for the Restoration of the Odinic. And I met him in about 1985, I guess, in person in London, him and some of his coworkers. And I met Freya Aswin at approximately that same time, too, just as one brief encounter. And there was Elsa Christensen, who had been doing the same sort of thing on kind of with a different approach. Everybody has their own approach. They bring something different to it. Mine was different from Elsa Christensen's, which was different from John Yowell. There were, and unbeknownst to all of us, the Icelanders were kind of getting things underway as well. So it all kind of came about, quote, spontaneously. I will say synchronistically, because obviously there's a deeper current at work here. It's not just me or John Yowell or Elsa Christensen. It's like there was an alarm bell. Hey, time to wake up, guys. This is it. Let's get it rocking. And so I think that's an important thing to remember.
That's such from my point of view, coming on much later after that, that's such a fantastic and amazing thing. Freya said something last week. She said, it doesn't matter. It's all coming from the same well. When we begin to look at that, at life, living this Asatru life, there's a lot of question. There's a lot of debate. And I think sometimes in that debate, we lose the idea that these are truly divine beings, that something special is really occurring. I don't think it's any accident that it happened as cultures began to decline, as we began to get lost. You've seen it drift to the left and to the right. What do you think about how it's gone over here, it's gone over there as we try to find this path forward? I mean, we obviously get distracted. What's your thoughts on all that?
I like what you just said. I think that the current state of our civilization, that Western civilization, that we inherited, and the primordial Western / European / Indo-European cultures and traditions that preceded that, and from which Western civilization developed.
Right.
Our current status is not good. It's like there was an alarm bell on the Titanic going off saying, hey, icebergs ahead, and you guys are not ready for this. You need to return to your essence of who you are if you as a people are to survive. And I think if you call it the group soul, the collective unconscious, call it the message from the gods, I don't care what you call it, whether you person matter. the alarm bells were going off, and people around the world were hearing it in different ways.
I think it's interesting. I think one of the things that we get confused with is that we get too busy pointing at the iceberg and not correcting the course of the ship. Anna Mae Funk said that to me a couple of weeks ago, and it blew my mind. But
we can't get people off the dance floor yet.
Right, that's exactly it. Yeah, they're still up there whistling Dixie. So you put out your book Asatru, A Native European Spirituality. And it's really become a mainstay for a lot of us with just because of who you are, what you've accomplished. I mean, you literally had to carry this torch by yourself with your own thoughts, figure it out along the way. Mistakes were made, lessons were learned, and you come out and put out Asatru. Do you have any intentions of following that book up?
Well, yes, I do. And one of the upcoming works will be an expanded version of my work I did for the Rune Guild in regard to the cauldron system.
Which was I saw the presentation on that twice, and in both times I was very impressed by it. I look forward to that. That's going to be a fantastic work.
Well, I happen to have sitting here right next to me a very condensed version of the thing. And it runs, 50, 60 pages. There's, it's got academic style to it because that's the style that the guild uses. Yes. I don't want to get deeply into guild stuff, but basically a master academic criteria. You get a committee of people who go over it. When I submitted my first rough draft, and I knew that's what it was, I got the entire thing photocopied back with red lines on every page saying, fix this, fix this, fix this, fix this. The guild is no respecter of persons. And, and that's the way I like it, because that's how you correct yourself.
Yes.
And it's not really long enough to make a very good text right now, but I have added so much to practice since I wrote this more or less theoretical piece. What I've got here deals with, the basic concepts, how do we deal with the myth of Odin's winning the mead? What other parallels do we find? And we found parallels in Kundalini Yoga. We have terms in Old Norse that are the equivalent of terms in Sanskrit to describe similar phenomena. This is obviously part of a larger Indo-European derived thing. The Celts had the three cauldrons. They had the cauldron of poesy. This is from a manuscript dating back to the 700s when Druidism and Christianity were kind of doing this little dance, sometimes fight, sometimes dance, sometimes incorporate and rip off. And they did some considerable of that latter as well. And you find so many things that fit in perfectly with this scenario. And from that, I've been able to derive a set of practices, which I apply in my daily life. And right now, I spend between 1 and 2 hours a day. First thing in the morning, I get up at like 4 o'clock typically to do this work on myself, because I can't change the world if I can't change myself.
See, that's a real embracing of life that I think when I first entered the Gothi program and started to study this, when you were running the AFA, that it was a real effort to grasp the idea that this is a life-affirming faith. This is about grabbing a hold of life and living a good life. I think that's real important, that we be able to live these principles, to live good, solid lives. But as I was talking to you before, sometimes people get in that real tight spot in life, and they have a brush with a sickness, with a cancer, with a loss or something like that. I wonder sometimes when we grab a hold of that situation in life, are we cultivating the divine essence of these gods to help these people deal with that situation? So when I listened to your presentation on Alu and I read part of your book, I kind of find that. And so when you're sitting here telling me, hey, I'm using this in my daily practice, how best do you think we can continue to provide those examples of success through the difficult situations in life for these adherents to Asatru? because I think that's sometimes what we're missing with regards to this faith and spirituality.
Well, I think there's two major factors inputting into that kind of a situation. On one level, it is an individual thing. You know, when it's, am I paraphrasing Jimi Hendrix here? When I say, when it's, I'm going to one that's going to die when it's my time to die. Yeah. Was that Jimmy? Right. I don't remember. I don't remember the 60s very well. Because I was too busy being a right winger, but that's a whole other deal. But I came down with a very mild case, actually, that is illustrative in some ways. Some years back, I was diagnosed with a cancerous polyp, and it was too big for them to snip out, and they were going to have to do a colon resection. Mm-hmm. Which basically means they cut 10 inches of my gut out.
Oh, gosh.
And you know, when it was time to go under the knife, I was the guy going under the knife. You know, nobody else could do that for me. When it's our turns to die, we die on our own merits and our failures, as the case may be. And as I went into this, I knew I wanted to use the situation. And I decided that as I went under anesthesia, and during the time I was out, and between then and the time I was revived, hopefully, I wanted to use that as a symbolic death and rebirth. And I said, I want to come out of this with some sort of an insight. And I did. I got some insights on what I should be doing. You know, too much emphasis on the European American Issues Forum, which I was running at the time. Most people never even heard of that. And I just decided I need to get back to a more solidly spiritual basis and so forth. So you can use your illnesses. And I do not say that in any way that is meant to be unsympathetic. I'm just saying you can use them. It's true. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And sometimes even what kills you makes you stronger if you go at it in the right attitude. Because I feel you ultimately come out on the other side in some status that's determined by your virtues and values. So yeah, that's the one aspect, the personal aspect. But we're not alone. We're part of a web of people. We are part of a kin group, basically, or a set of kin groups, if you've heard of thinking of it that way. And it is beneficial not just to the ones supported, but to those supporting them to lend what aid and assistance, even if it's nothing more than that look in the eye, or the clap on the back, or even a joke, even a sarcastic remark. All of those things in the right context can be uplifting and supporting. And we owe it not just to people undergoing, physical trauma, but other things in their lives. We've got to remember, we've got to stay tight. We are a community. I'm specifically thinking about the AFA, but I think that should apply to Asatru / heathens / Odinists everywhere. We need to be tight with those around us, with our support group. It's not just a support group. It's a family. It's a tribe. It's people we're bonded to in spirit and in might and with oaths and with horns of mead and laughter. We're bound to them in all those ways. And to do that, we have to actually help each other. We've got to be there for each other. The system outside us is failing us on every conceivable front. So we have to be that support. We have to be that stalwart who say, hey, man, I'll be there when you come out from anesthetic or whatever it may be.
See, I'm floored by both of those concepts because they are both such a vital aspect of everything all of the new people would wish to talk about. The idea, you are literally a sage and have just put forth an idea of masculinity, of handling the situation, of keeping the stiff upper lip that's not even on the radar of a lot of men that want to talk about being men. And here you are, you've just once again set an example. And the idea that we need to stick together, you're absolutely right. Those bonds, Scarlett has grown up going to these events all over the country. She knows these children. Is this person going to be there? Is this kid going to be there? And she's going to run and play. She'll have those friendships for her entire life. that generation is building those relationships. We might fall out and flop out somewhere sick or whatever, but those kids are going to remember. They're going to grow up in this. They're going to feel that, and they are going to be close with each other. And I think they're building the kind of sense of belonging to each other and to this that we had to figure out so much of. So when you say those things, it really, I mean, it gives me I love it. I think it's good stuff, Steve. That's awesome. So, you know, and when I look at that, and I was going to ask, you know, the old religions are failing, and most people are. It really does seem like they're whistling Dixie, or they're just giving up. I mean, when you look at the number of atheists in the world, how could these people just seemingly go it alone? Is it such a vacuum of spirituality that these individuals who want to proclaim that they're atheist or agnostic or whatever the case may be, that they could go it alone because they can't find a sense of belonging somewhere? I think that's a big part of what spirituality is. When we come around those fires in the AFA and there's 250 people sitting there raising a horn, there's a sense of belonging.
Yes.
I wonder sometimes, there's 850 million Caucasians in the world. And this club of kindreds, this ethnic, tribal, indigenous faith, how do we show these people who understand that everything is failing around them, would rather be atheist or pick up some political idea? How do we show them that this is something where we might once again love each other as brothers? Because I think at the bottom of it, that's what we're really looking at.
I agree. I mean, Christianity uses that expression a lot, brotherly love,
Yeah.
bound in the love of Jesus or whatever. And, okay, it sounds really tacky to us. Because especially coming from the part of the country we do, we've sort of seen the hypocritical and not very serious side of that sometimes. But there is a truth to it, and many Christians do honestly practice that, and so should we. We've got to first of all let people know we exist, and then secondly we have to really give them a taste of it, because you can't really relate something like that at long distance. And another thing we have to do is live it ourselves. If when we have disagreements among us, that needs to be taken care of discreetly or carefully or by calm reasoning or just by an agreement to disagree. We're not going to agree on everything. We're just not.
Right.
And as far as, go ahead.
I want to say that sometimes when you come across that us against them mentality, it really does create a sense of isolation and something you're so desperately wanting to belong to. And, hey, I've done it too, man. But
yeah,
we do need to agree to disagree. There's going to be people in these organizations we don't like it, but that's okay. We need them for their faith. We need them to demonstrate it works for them too. Right.
I mean, in general, I strongly believe in just, man.
There's across the world, there are other tribal kind of beliefs, indigenous faiths emerging, I would say. I'm doing an interview this afternoon with a lady who's following a Hellenic path. I see another person that are following these Egyptian ideologies, and I've seen a resurgence in voodoo among African Americans, and I've even heard whispers of Persian deities raising their heads again in the Middle East. We've been doing this probably longer than any of them in a legitimate fashion. How best do you think we could provide guidance for those individuals?
In a way, we almost have to have some kind of contact with these people to really do that on a really good level.
Right.
Years and years ago, we had really very healthy relationships with some of the Afrocentric religions. They understood that they were what we would call folkish. They were good with that, and they respected our right to be likewise. And so it was very much a mutual sort of thing. It would be nice to be able to talk to some of those folks and say, good luck on your path. Good luck with what you're doing. Maybe here's some lessons that worked for us, but whatever works for you, just, understand that there are people out there who don't necessarily follow your way, but support you in your following your way.
That's an interesting point too, because they are folkish in their way. They are folkish. You go to any neighborhood that's predominantly one race or another, those individuals are what we would call folkish. And yet I think when the media would wish to portray it as us, they almost put in parentheses behind the comment concerning our folkish ideas, they think they're better than. And that seems like that's what everybody hears. And I don't know that I necessarily care about diffusing that bomb at all. But by the same token, it is an issue we have to deal with. And I think helping those kind of individuals, it doesn't necessarily mean I want to bring them into my circle, because they got their own circle, I got mine. But I think that the indulgence of that kind of communication, which you just described, is necessary for us to even survive, I would almost say, as a species. We have real issues on our planet, and we have recurring issues on our planet of global destruction on scales we can't begin to imagine. We've had it pretty easy for hundreds of years. No major comets, no big volcanoes. We had the tidal wave that washed across Southeast Asia, and we got a taste of what it might be like. Much of Joseph Campbell wrote in his book, The Power of Myth, or maybe it was The Hero's Journey. He said whenever a group would move into an area, the first thing they would do is would incorporate themselves and their spirituality into the world around them. Do you think we have any kind of obligation to begin to embrace that same kind of mindset as we once again try to incorporate ourselves into the worlds we live in this spirituality and Asatru?
Personally, I think we do. I mean, even, oh goodness, back in the 80s, back in the early 80s, try to look at a date. Yeah, in the early 80s, we had a ritual where we would go out, people, not just we meaning an organization, but people would go out into the wild, and they would have a picnic or a whatever, but it was always in a place that could be improved. And when they'd had their sandwiches and their laughs or whatever, they would clean the place up, or they would make it better than they left it, and they would leave an offering for the land whites.
Really?
And that's been a part of organized Asatru, which doesn't seem to get that much attention anymore, but should.
I think so too.
Because it's been a part of what we organizationally have done, like I say, since the 80s, early 80s, and it's important for us as individuals. It feeds us. It feeds our soul. It teaches our children and those around us right values, and it, in its own extremely tiny way, makes a little difference. We must never hesitate to make a little difference if a little difference is the only difference we can make. We should do that just as a matter of principle, because every single shot counts. We must never fail to do anything just because we can't do something momentous. Right.
I agree. That strikes me as important as a comment as you made to me one time at Camp Norgay. I think it was 2012. Remember when I had to rescue my son off that cliff?
Yeah.
We had a leadership meeting there, and you said something to me that I'll never forget. You said we must not surrender the semantic high ground. And I wonder sometimes, you just said, if you can make a little difference, make that difference. We must not surrender the semantic high ground. These kind of sayings, I think, really lead into something for me. I mean, I'm going to remember you for a long time. I'm going to talk to my children and my grandchildren about you. And those kinds of comments are the things that I'm going to say to them. Don't hesitate to make a difference if you can. It doesn't have to be grand. Just make a difference. When you think about the legacy that you're going to leave on the world, and there is no doubt that you're going to leave a legacy on the world, what do you envision that as? because there's 100 different people like me that have those kinds of ideas.
Yeah, I can think of all sorts of ironic and twisted things that might be carved into my gravestone. Many of them not suitable for a young audience. At the very least, I would like to be remembered as a man who did his best, who, despite being just another human being, was at least a committed human being who did his job as best he could, and who continued the mission all the way, never slacked, never surrendered, never gave up. Tempted to say something, I'd like to die with my boots on.
Right.
The kind of world we live in, that's not impossible. Or I would like to be remembered for things I haven't even done yet. I've still got a few good years left, and I have got butt to kick, and I've got just the boots to wear kicking butt. So, in fact, I went to the Scottish games down in Pleasanton, California.
How was it? Was it fun?
It was awesome, and I wore my boots. I still got my Bosnia boots, which I bought those boots on the streets of Amsterdam, having just flown in from Johannesburg, and having forfeited a ticket back to San Francisco so that I could get on a train and go down and visit some people in Bosnia. And so I've still got those boots, and every time I put those boots on, those memories flood back. So this we remember about ourselves that we will never be able to successfully communicate to a larger audience.
Yeah, you're right.
But I've got some things I'm working on. I want to make some major differences before I die. I want to do my bit to change the world. And, that doesn't mean organizing a secret guerrilla resistance or anything like that. But it means organizing a spiritual resistance, taking the might of Wotan, to use him to call Odin in his German, his continental expression, to a new level. Want to invoke the might and the wisdom. Got to have the wisdom. Just the might's not enough. Got to have the might and the wisdom of Wotan / Odin / Woden, and bring it in a way that will break through to an exponentially larger number of people. I'm thinking like something like the Germanic revival that occurred under Guido von List and some of those folks. There's some problems with the way that one turned out, but that doesn't mean you don't try. Doesn't mean you don't try. You can only lose by not trying. So I think this time, that's why we've got to have the wisdom as well. All players concerned must have wisdom. And I think that can be done. It can be done in ways that are obvious. It can be done in ways that are subtle. We must create that set of conditions that will allow that might to flow through us. We ourselves must be changed spiritually in order to affect this larger change. We must be worthy conductors of this surge of voltage. We don't want it to, we don't want to blow our fuses.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that falls back on what you said with surrendering the semantic high ground. I mean, there's so much that what we do, society will give us a label, will categorize us and put us in a box and neatly ignore us if we're not utilizing that wisdom that you're talking about, if we're not utilizing right action. Because we are combating labels, right and left. We are combating to achieve the semantic high ground. And that sense of belonging, that set of conditions that you're talking about, I think are absolutely crucial to our ability, your ability to create that mentality that would welcome these other individuals that we want within this group, within this ideology, to join us at the well, so to speak.
I believe that we collectively are entering very perilous times. There are a number of existential threats that we face. Some of them are political. I won't go into that, but I will go into some of the cultural ones. And these are things like virtual reality, artificial intelligence, the complete absorption of our young people into the Borg, basically. We're against a version of the Borg. This goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of this discussion. When you spend all your time relating to your cell phone, or wow, wait till virtual reality comes along. What really full-fledged? Wait till virtual reality sex shows up, man. Personally, I think that's one answer to what is called the Fermi paradox. Enrico Fermi, physicist, asked rhetorically the question to some of his friends once, so with a universe this big, why haven't we been visited? And today, you can watch the evolution of the answers to that question. In the 1960s, the answer was, oh, wow, they must have nuked themselves out of existence. And then with the coming on of the green movement, it was, oh, wow, they just polluted their planets to death, man, and they could never get here. I just think they invented virtual reality sex.
You're probably right. Yeah.
They died at their temples. I mean, okay, slight exaggeration. Maybe, but I hope it makes my point. Yeah, that we are raising generations, plural, that are being plugged into trivia, into entertainment, and as time goes on, that's going to get worse. I personally believe that there is a class of very well-to-do who would love to see the masses absorbed in nonsense, because people who are absorbed in nonsense without a commitment to real people in real life are so much easier to control.
Well, that's fairly obvious. I mean, if you look even at a gradual timeline, what you're talking about is not too far of a stretch from the truth, and there are lessons in history for that too. If you look all across the earth, there are these great civilizations that are lying in ruins. They separated themselves entirely from the environments they live in. They became comfortable. They had running water. They had surpluses of food. They built great temples and cities and avenues all over the world. They all separated themselves from the environment in which they live in, and that is the world. And every one of them failed. They could not adapt to a comet, a volcano, a disease, and they failed. And I think we bring ourselves to that same threshold with these ideas of comfort and electronics. And I think it's a great disservice to the future of our children to handicap them in the way that you're discussing, to handicap their ability to operate on this planet because they're watching it on TV. Well,
yep.
Now what? So when I look at it from that point of view, I look at this resurgence of indigenous tribal faiths in a much different way. Now all of a sudden they become far more important, don't they? Now all of a sudden it's much easier for me to grab a hold of the idea of the divinity of them. I think sometimes when we sacrifice that divinity, we don't consider them real. I'm sure you've seen that, individuals that would rather role play than take this as a legitimate idea or spirituality and faith. I wonder sometimes amongst those individuals if the problems of being distracted by ideas of politics or being distracted by ideas of righteous indignation are part of the problem of what's drawing these people off the course to the left or to the right. You have, on one hand, you have the far right, you have your neo-Nazis, you have even further past that, there's some others. And then on the left, you have those individuals that hate those individuals because they think they hate somebody. So, but they're all supposed to be pagans or heathens. They all have this idea of Odin. And yet they're distracted completely. They've surrendered the semantic high ground to accept the labels, to draw their identity from these causes that they think will move them forward or give them originality. When you're talking about leaving this legacy that changes the world, I'm hearing, and I could be wrong, a man who has an idea that there's some way to stop that nonsense and bring us back on this course of rebuilding this faith. Am I correct in hearing something along those lines?
That is absolutely correct. Now, actually, as you know, and as everybody watching this knows, I am very political. We're just not going there. Yeah, we're not talking that here. But
and we're very much along the same lines politically.
Yeah, but if it's not based in something deeper than the mechanics of politics, it is soulless. Beneath politics has to come, broadly speaking, culture, and more specifically, spirituality. Yeah, they use the word, like they use the term upstream, and I think that's fortunate. That's so pictorial. Politics is downstream from religion, spirituality, and the general culture. Where you can think of it like an onion, the layers of an onion. You know, the outer level might be politics, but the deeper levels are spirituality and philosophy and culture, some combination of all of those things. These are the things that determine what kind of political system and what kind of political values will dominate.
I've really been captivated by the ideas of Balder and Forseti most recently. When you look at the Rigsthule, you see these three couples give their grandchildren have these names that kind of represent the ideas that build a society, that build a civilization. The laborer, the one that has a little skill, and the one that manages all of it. And they whether you look at it as classes or whether you look at it generationally, you see that that Rig's gift to humanity. Then you see in Asgard Balder, whose home none may gainsay his judgment, where fewest baleful runes lie. And then you see his son Forseti, that know that he gives the fairest judgments between men. You have this establishment of justice, and you have the tools to build a civilization. If we were to begin to embrace that, the ideas captured my imagination. What if this state of Jefferson could be a pagan state? We have literally the tools, the foundation, the ideas. There's where our wisdom comes in. If the Mormons can build hand carts and go across the plains, well, why couldn't we take Jefferson and make it a pagan state, a heathen state? Imagine what that would be if a man could believe in his system of government as free men, as espoused by the rulings of Forseti and Balder. That's the kind of thing that captures my imagination the most these days. And I'm sure it just tickled your fancy too.
Right. Yeah, pretty much living up here, on the fringes of the state of Jefferson, if it ever comes about. Unfortunately, that seems to have lost some momentum, but the idea will not per se go away, especially in California. But
it's so pretty.
Yeah, I'm not going to
I love California, man.
I won't say what I think of the governor or any of the people that run in his crowd. But I think that when it comes to building societies, if we look back at the basics of our society, of especially Anglo-American society, speaking as an Irishman,
Right.
We find a profound amount of influence from the Saxons and from Northern Europe generally. We are not really so much based on Rome. You know, that whole legal system and the governmental system and so forth that came from that area. We get much more from the rights of the freeman. Thomas Jefferson, as some of your listeners will be aware, suggested that on the obverse side of the Great Seal of the United States should be pictures of Hengist and Horsa, the two Saxon leaders who basically, Jefferson also wrote and admitted, that the foundations of Anglo-Saxon common law predate Christianity.
Yes.
It's common knowledge. The earliest parliaments in Europe were in places like Iceland and a couple of other locations of comparable antiquity. We've got deep roots based in our philosophy, our worldview, our way of dealing with reality, our way of dealing with each other that greatly influenced the founding of the United States. Now, some of us might think it's gone downhill a little bit since then, but the basics are still very valid. They're very true, and it would be a shame if we just discarded that because some politician didn't like the way it was set up.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that's an eye-opening revelation for a lot of people that won't understand that. The Dana Law predated the Magna Carta, and the Magna Carta predated the Bill of Rights and our Constitution. And Thomas Jefferson, when he went to, was it Oxford? I think it was. It was one of the British universities or higher learning where he did pick up these Anglo-Saxon ideals. He did pick up a strong influence of what it might really mean to be free men. And I think it's overshadowed, and I think it's overshadowed for a reason. I mean, the Catholic Church is in Rome. I mean, good night. So I'm like you. I see this resurgence of these ideas. You kind of started in the 60s, and I was born in 70. So there's this, I've got a much different perception of 1969.
You were 2 years old when you went in the Army? Wow.
Yes. Yeah, something like that, man.
You know, Bryan, there is a particular fragment in the political right that is very disregardative of and dismissive of boomers. And my comment to boomers is, kid, I was fighting communists before your father was born.
Right. It's true, too. I said something like that one time. Never mind. We'll talk about that some other time. But you're right. There was an awakening. Do we have that summer of love? We had that age of Aquarius. We had all of that my generation got this romantic idea of it. And your face froze and you laugh on, man. But there's all of this coming out of the summer of love. This Generation X is really the one, I think, grabbing hold of this. And I don't think we ought to hold the baby boomers too hard of an account, because they did the best they could with what they had. But I think in a large sense, they're the ones. I know my mother was a huge influence in my life that broke those molds that they felt constrained by. And I think you have done that with regards to a spirituality. You broke a mold coming from the background that you came from and literally lit a torch for a lot of people. And I think we owe you a great debt for that. And I personally want to thank you for lighting that fire, because it has meant, it's meant a lot to me. It has changed my life in ways people can't imagine. And I know that it's done that for a lot of people. So I'm going to shut this down, but I did want to say thank you. And I hope that there's a lot of other people that join in on that. So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your efforts and hard work.
All right.